It's 580 steps atop the roof of Europe, a stairway to hell if humanity doesn't act fast. France's President Emmanuel Macron starting his day up the mountain at the famed Sea of Ice that gives on to the continent's highest peak, Mont Blanc, as he contemplated the glacier that's receded in thickness by 120 meters in just 1 century. He used this photo op, which by the way comes 1 month before municipal elections, to press new measures to go green. We'll review what was announced at a special cabinet meeting on Wednesday and go back down to sea level, where Winter Storm Ciara this week served as a reminder that accelerating global warming exposes to increased extreme weather. 17 million French people live either on the coast or in high-risk flood areas. Time to give up and move to higher ground with all that implies? Or is there still time for humanity to change its ways? UK oil giant BP now says it's not too late. Its brand new CEO promises shareholders to make the company completely net carbon neutral by the year 2050. Does that mean no more drilling for hydrocarbons? Are cleaner sources of energy plentiful and cost-effective enough to meet the demands of the planet? Who makes the rules in this race against the clock? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the green promises of politicians and CEOs. And joining us, former French Environment Minister Brice Lalonde. Speaking of CEOs, you chair the Business and Climate Summit, which is the annual CEOs Conference on climate change. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
We also want to welcome at this point energy consultant Louis Colasante. Welcome back to the show. As well, Clémence Dubois, campaigner at 350.org. You're an activist group with a special focus on fossil fuels.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
To build a counterpower to the fossil fuel industry.
All right. Thank you for being with us. Nicolas Schulze, formerly of the Intergovernmental Global Green Growth Institute, and now Director of Global Policy at the International Chamber of Commerce. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for inviting me.
And I should say a Swiss national as well.
Indeed, yes.
All right, we'll be talking about not too far from where you are, which is where the French president was this Thursday. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. I didn't imagine it had melted so fast, said Emmanuel Macron on a tour where he announced measures to extend mountain wildlife preserves, while local officials, with they too an eye to next month's municipal elections, clamored for a clampdown on air pollution in the valley below. Camille Nederek has more.
The Mer de Glace in Chamonix has been drawing tourists for generations, but perhaps for not much longer. The glacier is under threat because of climate change. In a visit on Thursday, French President Emmanuel Macron blamed the current climate crisis on previous inaction and vowed to turn the tide.
It will be the fight of the century, of our capacity to invent new ways to live and do sustainably.
Macron called for 2020 to be a decisive year for biodiversity nationally and internationally. He announced the creation of new national parks which will protect Mont Blanc and 250,000 hectares of forest, and urged France to embrace the circular economy. But these demonstrators decried a joint social and climate emergency, protesting over the impact of local pollution and the president's planned pensions reform. Some mourn the glacier's already blighted beauty as it shrinks rocky debris muddy the once pristine ice. This is what the glacier used to look like. It's lost 2 kilometers since 1850 and continues to recede by up to 10 meters every year. A glimpse of things to come.
The worrying thing is that things are speeding up. Over the last 10 years, each temperature high is hotter than the one before. Heat waves are becoming hotter and longer.
WWF labelled Macron's proposed measures as insufficient and warns that the only way to save the glacier is with an ambitious carbon reduction plan.
Yeah, it's been the occasion, as we saw in that report, to take out old pictures, such as this one that was posted on Twitter, an old postcard dating back to 1909, and you could see what it looked like back then. Brice Lalonde, your reaction to the WWF saying that the French president's announcements are insufficient?
I was listening to President Macron with an American citizen, and she was quite surprised. She said, "Oh, these French people are never happy with their president, but do you want to swap with Trump?" So I thought he was quite convincing. Of course, it's never enough. I thought he was much better on biodiversity and nature protection. There he looked very convinced and committed. Not so good on climate change, and I would say on the energy transition path. There's lots of things which are missing right now.
Clémence Dubois?
Yes, I think being better than Donald Trump doesn't make
That's a low bar.
Doesn't make you a convincing president, and especially when you know that each fraction of a degree is a matter of millions of life or death of ecosystems and humans. And so I would go even further than WWF. I would say that it's pretty ridiculous, actually, the measures that he announced. So, for instance, cutting off single-use cutlery by 2040, for instance. So the climate justice movement for decades has been asking for real measures, articulating clearly what it means to be a climate champion. That means doing whatever you can now to keep the fossil fuel on the ground. And instead of that, it's just cosmetic measures that we've heard again today.
All right, we'll talk about the broader measures in terms of what has to be done on a broader scale, but specifically to the Alps. I mean, it's one of the biologists who accompanied him said that 60% of species have died in the areas in the nature preserves up at the top of the Alps, and it is heartbreaking when you look at those pictures, Nicolas Schulze.
No, that is absolutely true, and I agree with Brice Lalonde. I mean, certainly President Macron was very convincing on all issues related to biodiversity. I think it's not a coincidence that he made his announcement after being at the Mer de Glace, because glaciers constitute really climate change at its most visible. So that's something everybody can see. It's different with tornadoes. You can always say, well, it's linked to other things. But certainly when you look at the glaciers in the Alps, in the Andes and elsewhere, they're all receding. And you compare to old pictures, you just see it's happening. It's real. And I think it's important that President Macron made that announcement from there, because it's important that actually citizens see what is happening. And I fully agree, it is the fight of our century. So there is no escape from it. And certainly from a business perspective, from where we're representing, we need to lead for the long term and make climate change everyone's business.
Let's talk about the local level. The biggest gripe that we heard this Thursday, officials in the Alps pressing the government to crack down on air pollution, with they're suggesting tax incentives to move away from wood-burning stoves, and in particular restrictions on trucks transiting on their way to Italy and Switzerland. In an interview, though, with local newspaper Le Dauphiné Libéré, Macron stating he can't ban trucks from passing, calling instead for a Europe-wide renewal of the transport fleet so as not to solely penalize French truckers. Is there more that can be done to reduce the traffic of those freight trucks in the valleys? And again, that pollution gets trapped in those mountain areas.
So there are other type of mobility that the French government need to see. Transportation as trend, for example, shipping. And it's not the only way to have transportation by truck. We need to see more globally what is the impact in the society to have this type of policy can do for the people that live in this area. This is one of the things that we need to think about more in a new way, that we don't speak about only energy transition or CO2. We need to think now as behavior. What is the behavior of the people? How we can complete that in the new economy?
So I heard some of the local officials suggesting systems whereby, for instance, cars...
Don't put on train.
That they be carpooling even in the valleys of the Alps, and more bus service.
The Swiss have a very good transport policy where the trucks have to be put on trains. And there's been strong incentives. Each time you You have a car and you drive in Switzerland, you have to pay a tax when you get into the highways. This money goes to improving the rail system. So it's been a very long time that people in Chamonix have been fighting against the trucks. And there has been a horrible accident something like 20 years ago where there was a truck which went burning inside of the tunnel and lots of people died. So it's a question, it's a very important question. You know, it's should we try to improve our system, our transport system? Obviously we should. And we can have cleaner trucks, or we can reduce the number of trucks.
But you can't just snap your fingers and have train service. We've seen with the the Lyon-Turin rail link with a tunnel that's being built. It's been going on for decades, and there's a lot of opposition. Environmentalists are divided over whether it's a good idea or not.
Sure, but I mean, I was a minister a long time ago, and I tried to protect the Mont Blanc. And there was a strong opposition at the time of all the people who thought tourism was more important, that you would block, it would be very bad for the economy. So for me, to see that now you can protect the Mont Blanc is a great achievement.
I just want to underline something. Since Emmanuel Macron has been elected, we've seen the decrease of, for instance, the night train, which is an excellent alternative to travel around Europe. All the trains have been the situation is not as good as
there's talk of bringing them back, those night trains.
Sorry?
There's talk of bringing back night trains.
Well, and thanks to the civil society, because we know now who are the leaders. You're saying that, I've heard here, that people need to realize, so it's great that Emmanuel Macron is at the top of this mountain, but for me it looks like a burial, because actually climate change is one of the first concern for French people. It's one of the main priorities for their vote. So they don't need Emmanuel Macron to show that the snow has disappeared, to know that the situation is urgent and dramatic. What we need from him, it's not to make it the fight of the century, but the fight of the year, the fight of the decade. What we've seen this year is millions of people in the streets to ask for urgent climate action. And instead of that, Emmanuel Macron, again, is just making communications.
Okay, so Clément, specifically on the issue of, because environmentalists are divided, on the issue of more rails, building more rail lines in the mountains. Is that a good idea or a bad one?
So I'm not a specialist about the situation in the mountains there, but I know that, for instance, what about the airport extensions? There are lots and multiples of airport extensions that are happening in France, against which French people are fighting. So of course, train is a good thing.
You touched upon the vast traffic of lorries across the Alps and elsewhere. I mean, the real issue here is it's too cheap to actually use lorries to transport your goods, and it would be much less tempting to actually use road transportation if you actually had a carbon price that would give a clear signal that actually it's much cheaper to use rail and other alternative transportation means than actually relying on the road. Once you have that, and it doesn't happen from one day to another, once you have that signal, you actually start shifting.
All right, and we had a hint of that to make it more expensive from the French president in his remarks at a time when the new European Commission is promising a Green New Deal. Emmanuel Macron talking up a harmonization of carbon pricing across the continent.
The battle is now also a European matter. It is to fight for a higher CO2 price, a real floor price, a carbon inclusion mechanism at our borders, to have a real European transition strategy which allows us to go much faster. Because each time I ask industrialists, and it's fair, to go faster than the neighbors, they reply to me, if you do that, you will destroy our industrial fabric, destabilize our territory. You just have to do a few kilometers. The rule is not the same. It is not possible, and therefore European policy in this area is essential.
Nicolas Schulze, you heard Clémence Dubois saying we have to go much faster. When you talk about coming to a common agreement among 27 nations for upping the price of carbon, how fast can it go?
Well, I mean, the real issue here is to make sure you have policy coherence. In fact, one of the problems you've had in Europe is actually you've had too many different pricing signals. You have the European Emission Trading Scheme, which is checked today is at 23 euros the ton, which is far below what it ought to be to actually give the right signal to shift things away from the current trajectory. At the same time, you have countries like Sweden, which is a member of the European Union, that has one of the highest carbon price in the world, and you have other countries that do not have any carbon tax or carbon price. So it is very difficult to bring some coherence into that, and unless you actually work on that, a clear carbon pricing signal through the emission trading scheme, through the price of using using transportation that is highly emitting. If you have that signal, then things will shift.
All right, but when will they shift? We'll ask our panel when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're looking at green promises, both here in France and further afield. What with Emmanuel Macron, who made announcements after chairing a special cabinet meeting on Wednesday from the Alps, the roof of Europe, if you will, across from Mont Blanc, where the glaciers are melting at an alarming rate. We're talking about with former French Environment Minister Brice Lalonde, who chairs the Business and Climate Summit, which is the annual CEO's conference on climate change. Welcome back as well to energy consultant Louise Colasante. We're with Clémence Dubois, campaigner at 350.org. Why 350?
Because it's the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere that has been deemed as safe, and we just passed 410, and since I am even born, we are over 350.
Wow. Okay. Nicolas Schulte is with us as well, formerly of the Intergovernmental Global Green Growth Institute, and now Director of Global Policy at the International Chamber of Commerce. Just before the break, we were talking about the carbon price. My follow-up question to you is, all right, we have this new commission in Brussels, and they're talking up a Green New Deal, but can you get consensus on making it more expensive and harmonizing that price of carbon?
Well, that will be the real challenge for the current Commission. I mean, certainly all these issues I touched upon, the Commission is fully aware of. I think the policy coherence I touched upon, which has to take place both domestically, and when we say domestically, that's the European Union in that case, and globally, and the issue of trade and climate, the coherence thereof. And we've heard within the Commission discussions about border tax adjustments. There are other means. It is certainly important that we bear these in mind, because certainly for us, coming from the business world, we need to have policy coherence. We need to have short-term and long-term signals. And I think that is really the real challenge. And I'm not sure the European Commission will be able to very quickly come to such a...
Could take a while.
Yes.
You agree with that, Brice Lalonde, that we won't get a harmonization of the price of carbon among the 27?
Well, what's lacking is a common energy policy for Europe. We don't have it. We have as much energy policies as countries. So that's the problem. Some countries are going nuclear, some don't. So that's going to be very difficult. I mean, even in France, it's not very consistent. I mean, okay, look, last week there was Madame Cocher was. Her appointment was not, she stopped. Why? Because she was not pushing gas enough. Natural gas, but that's a fossil fuel. So there's inconsistency. We are stopping a decarbonized plant in nuclear, Fessenheim, but we are keeping a coal power plant near Nantes. So there's lots of things like that, if you want, which make it difficult after to be very consistent and to have confidence, I would say, in the policy.
You agree with Louise Colasante?
Exactly, 100%. For example, in our European policy, we have some signals, CO2 signal. So they have increased the CO2 prices, have already increased from 2016 until today, have doubled in terms of prices of CO2. But
because it had fallen very low. So.
Exactly, they start from the growth. This is true. Also, the second point is that we need to clarify what is the fiscality, because we have this confusion between CO2 taxes and CO2 taxes. For example, Macron, we saw what happened that we start to speak about CO2 taxes for the French people, and we have Gilets jaunes. The trigger of Gilets jaunes was the price of
The Yellow Vest movement was the fact
Yellow
that it was a carbon tax.
carbon tax.
Yeah, I can flag a huge inconsistencies European-wide. The European Parliament just adopted the climate emergency resolution, and just yesterday they adopted a list which is called the Project of Common Interest related on energy infrastructure. So you would imagine that it only rely on renewables, for instance, because it's of common interest. But inside this list, there are 55 projects that are gas one. And so the civil society has been fighting against it and has been very loud about it.
The argument is you can't go that fast when it comes to the energy transition, that we don't yet have the renewables.
Stay locked in gas.
Yes, indeed, we're going to stay locked in gas. It's against our climate commitments. And so Emmanuel Macron, who was today at the Mont Blanc, just yesterday, his group, his party, just voted for this list.
I think, like in most of the cases, I mean, what matters is how you manage the transition. I mean, what we want to achieve here for the European Union and beyond is that we shift the trajectory on which we are, where economic GDP growth is aligned with emissions growth. We need to have that decoupling. So what do we need is we need to have signals that will tell us, okay, well, in 10 years' time, carbon price will be at that level. In 15, at that level. It gradually increases. We have that to a certain extent within the European emissions trading system, where from next year onwards, we will have a reduction of cap by 2%. But it's not enough. So we need to have a clear trajectory. In fact, in Switzerland, that's what you have. You have in the new climate policy, you know exactly what will be the carbon price in which year. So you prepare for that. And that's managing the transition.
I'm sorry, but when you do the math, you know that staying at 1.5 degrees, which is the ambition, means no new fossil fuel infrastructure and actually closing some existing ones. So it's not about the timing. There was an opportunity just now, and the European Parliament missed it. So the math is clear in terms of fossil fuels.
We'll continue what he said before, that it is important that CO2 have a price signal, because it's the only way that can be done investment. We have a policy today that integrates that the economy, financial, and the society. This is the right time. I don't think that is the ultimate time. We can do better each time. This is what is important at the European policy, actually.
And again, if you have these signals, in fact, you will see that pension funds will no longer invest into infrastructure that may result as a sunk infrastructure, because you don't want to have your pension invested in an oil plant when it's worth nothing in 20 or 30 years' time.
So it's really interesting you're saying that, because those signals that you shouldn't invest into those plants have come from the civil society and the climate justice movement, which has led the divestment movement. And now there are over 1,000 institutions that have committed to divest from fossil fuels, representing trillions. And now even Goldman Sachs report said that divestment is a key reason why coal companies are struggling to find to finance their expansion. So the signal that we're looking for is always coming from the society that is leading the way.
From civil society and the private sector, not from governments. Does it matter where it comes from?
So the civil society is constraining the private sector and the government, because the problem now is that governments are working hand in hand with the fossil fuel industry instead of breaking the ties.
All right, and that brings us to the issue across the channel. Last week, the new head of BP got quite the welcoming reception. Greenpeace activists installing solar panels outside the London offices of Bernard Looney, and you might say, putting on a bit of pressure.
Congrats on the new job, Mr. Looney. We're here outside your new offices to deliver you the opportunity on your first day to turn BP into 100% renewable over the next 10 years.
Now, it's not going to happen in 10 years, but Looney did recognize the world's carbon budget is finite, as he put it, and, quote, running out fast, as he pledged to cut the oil majors' carbon emissions to a net of zero by the year 2050.
Does that mean we'll be producing and refining hydrocarbons in 2050? Yes, very likely. Does that mean we'll be producing and refining less of them in 2050? Yes, almost certainly. And our aim is that any residual hydrocarbons will be decarbonized.
Your reaction to that announcement, please, Lalonde.
Well, I remember not long ago, it was a former CEO of BP, and he said, oh, BP is changing. Now we are called Beyond Petroleum. And after, another CEO came, and it was Deep Horizon. And no more of Beyond Petroleum. Let's go deep into drilling more and more for fossil fuel. So now there's a new CEO. Okay, great. Welcome. Let's hope it's going to be true.
All right, you sound skeptical. Let me ask you about this because one of the problems, and it's not just BP, by the way, Repsol has also made the same pledge.
Total also, I would say.
Total close to that of a net zero.
Not zero. But for instance, Total is a company which is the second largest company producing solar cells. It's no more petrol, it's oil. It's gas, sorry. It's gone to gas. And it's slowly moving to something else. Now, I mean, these companies have a lot of money. So they should stop drilling, for sure, and invest in other sources of energy.
Let's give an order of scale then on this. Luis Colasante, British Petroleum spends $500 to $700 million in wind farms and other renewables. They spend each year $14 billion on oil and gas. That's not going to change.
Yes, this is the balances that they have. But this is not something new. We have this type of speech at the beginning of the 17th, when the first oil price crisis arrived. The second, 10 years later, the 80s.
In the 1970s, the beginning of the 1970s.
The 70s, yes, 73, I remember well. In the 80s, also, second oil price crisis arrived. So at the moment, all the community start to think about how we can change, how we can make an energy transition. And the energy transition was have to add different type of technology in the past war to do better. But now we have something new that this company want to be seen by his customer as a green. And this is the chance that we have and the opportunity that they take. Also as a customer-centric, they want to have client and customer that like them.
Yeah, okay, so there's two schools of thought on this, Nicholas Schulze, because on the one hand, yes, there is divestment. We heard the Norwegian Central Bank today saying that right now people are investing less in oil companies because of the bad publicity that they have. On the other hand, shareholders, they like the dividend. They like getting that money every year. And in the case of BP, one analyst described it as an $8.5 billion dividend burden. That if you cut that dividend, the stock will go through the floor.
Well, again, I mean, if you're an analyst, you look at the long-term share price that your company will yield. So in that particular instance, again, if you're an investor in one of the oil majors, and by the way, the oil majors are transitioning towards becoming energy majors. So it's now a mixture of energy solutions they're bringing to the market. So moving away from merely extracting oil and selling it. So that's already one point. The other issue is really that it's a purely economic issue, because if you are investing in one of the oil majors and you know that in 20 or 30 years' time your investment is worthless, I mean...
Is it already the case for coal?
For coal, yes. There are already many, there's a lot of divestment happening in many instances, certainly. I mean, again, we can't from one day to another tell the South Africans, stop extracting coal, and at the same time make sure that the poorest get access to energy. So again, it's how you manage that transition which is important.
I think President Macron and all others, they believe the strength of the economy is going to make the difference. They believe in the new energy policy, the new environmental friendly policy. You're going to earn more money than if you stay in the old economy. That's the challenge. That's what they're trying to do. And of course, you cannot do that if you don't have also incentives, if you don't change your fiscal policy, if you don't really, I would say, take political measures which will help the economy to go on that side. Otherwise, it's not going to happen easily. It's going to take too long.
Clémence Dubois?
Yes, sounds like for a lot of people, the worst with extinction is that it's going to damage the economic market. But actually, also, around the world, the climate action demand is here around the world, not just in the OECD countries. So in South Africa, where actually Total has a huge project, it's being fought by the society as well, because this is damaging their livelihoods, their just everything they need to survive. So their land, their water is just being damaged by those kind of projects. So it's not about from one day to another. It's about fighting for those companies who have five times more reserves of oil, coal, and gas that we can burn to stop from now on. Otherwise, everything we rely on to have what we call an economy is going to collapse. So that's as simple as that. And for BP, just to say, they invest 2% of their expenditure now in renewables, and so 98% in oil and gas. So indeed, they can't be credible when it comes to climate
What
action.
do you do then? What do you do? Do you ban drilling? Is that what you would do if you were
So of course, this is a demand that has been clearly articulated by the climate movement over COP21, COP22, and even before, because we know what it means. That means banning those permits, and it means making them pay for the transition, and so that means dismantling this industry. And so if our governments are serious about that, we need to tackle this question. How can we dismantle this industry without having an entire collapse of our economy, because now their shares are so huge in our economy that divestment is one option. But what do we do from here to avoid the burst of the carbon bubble that would hit again the most vulnerable people?
I think we've talked a lot about the supply side of things in the energy markets, but there's also a demand side. And in fact, through innovation, hopefully one becomes more efficient and one uses energy in a better manner. I mean, we talk a lot about circular economy. We talk a lot about energy efficiency. I mean, that will have a huge effect also on the demand side. So I think when the new CEO of BP is taking that turn, it's also because he sees there will be less demand for these products in the future. So he needs to change.
And there was a good news a few days ago. The International Energy Agency told us that the emissions have stalled. They haven't grown last year. And so they are wondering, have we reached the peak of the emissions, of the pollution? Is it going to go down now? So we don't know. It's a turning point. So all these discussions...
Why do you think they've plateaued?
Why? Well, because of...
Is it just a blip?
Renewables. That's what the answer of the International Agency was, because of the renewables are now coming into the market and they are producing quite a lot of energy decarbonized. That's what they say.
Also, only to add, it's a mix between the growth of the economy and the growth of the renewable energy. But one thing, the speech that oil company had made is not so different as the moment that, you remember Exxon Valdez? The speech was the same. Yes, it was the same.
The oil spill off Alaska.
In Alaska, exactly.
Yes.
So until today, what happened? We are speaking about energy transition since more than 40 years. And now the difference is that we need to make an energy transition with behavior.
All right, it brings us back to the point that Clémence Dubois was mentioning, the pressure from ordinary citizens. And among the measures that were announced at that special cabinet meeting that took place Wednesday, French civil servants starting next year will have to take the train for trips shorter than 4 hours, 6 hours if it's a round trip. They're also banning single-use plastics for civil servants. You have to bring your cup to the office. And a €200 incentive if you ride your bike to the office. This is just for French civil servants. Lifestyle changes Can they help? Does it work? Are you for it?
There are multiple studies that shows that it's not enough. So of course it's common sense that you won't take the plane for a 4-hour trip by train. I mean, but it's 2020. We need to go a bit further than that. So this is why I think it's really important to focus actually on the supply side rather than the consumer side, because the question of climate has been depoliticized for decades, where it was all about the citizens, but we want energy, we want to consume. And why is that? It's because for decades as well, the industry has been pouring millions and millions into lobbying to make it as if, first of all, the problem doesn't
Clémence,
exist.
You just heard Brice Lalonde say that he says it's down to the fact that there have been lifestyle changes, that there are more people using, that there is more renewables. That's why people are turning less to carbon already.
So, of course, there is lifestyle change, but we must not forget that most of the carbon emissions are emitted by rich people, and the rich people doesn't account for the majority of the society.
Nicolas Scholze?
Yes, I mean, I couldn't agree more. It's actually the rich people who pollute more. And again, I mean, the issue is really a pricing issue. If today you want to do a day trip to London from Paris, it's actually cheaper to take the plane than take the train. I mean, there is a pricing issue, that's for sure. And by the way, in Switzerland, it's any trip by civil servants below 6 hours has to be taken by the train. So, of course, governments need to give an example. They need to be exemplary in their behavior. I think that's an important signal, but in a way that's trivial compared to the size of the problem.
All right,
I think it's important to flag that while it's maybe a plateau, you still have more and more CO2 emissions years by years, and so this is because the industry is also blocking this energy transition.
Very quickly, Brice Lalonde.
No, actually, it is plateauing. So let's hope that next year is going to go down. At one, there's going to be a turning point.
All right, Brice Lalonde, I want to thank you. I want to thank Clémence Dubois, Nicolas Scholze, Luis Colasante. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, François.
Yeah, we haven't used that word yet. Greenwashing.
It's being used.
No, we haven't.
Okay, but it is being used quite a bit.
Yeah, I see that.
I wasn't going to use it immediately, but I will get to it.
Okay.
Greta Thunberg tweeted today. She does do a lot of that these days, and she draws attention to issues that a lot of politicians probably are a little bit, there's not much they feel they can do quickly about it. But this is the highest recorded temperature ever in Antarctica. So another icy part of the world, at least for now, and that indeed is the highest temperature recorded since 1982, and the first time over 20 degrees Celsius has been recorded. We see other reporting here from The Guardian going back a couple of weeks. This is in the Alps, of course, where Emmanuel Macron has been visiting Chamonix, and really it's a bleak enough picture for, if we're to talk industry for a moment, for the skiing industry, because the snow is definitely receding. And indeed, one of the lines in this piece is for the alpine ski industry, this is a potentially extinction level event. Because what we're looking at is an increase. For the past 100 years, the number of hours of sunshine that is hitting the mountain each year has increased by 20%. It's a very peculiar situation in the Alps, apparently, where, for reasons scientists don't fully understand, so going beyond perhaps some climate change, they're warming faster than the global average. And of course, that's why we have seen a lot of images such as these going up on French news websites.
Before and after pictures.
The iceless age, if you like. And this is La Mer de Glace glacier. And you can see in the course over time the extent to which the ice is just receding pretty dramatically in the glacier. So lots of before and after pictures such as that showing that there is a dramatic and accelerated change. And Emmanuel Macron was there to draw attention to it and to the measures that are to be taken. And indeed, he even, if you like, shared those before and after images as well with this message. This is what we are fighting for. I guess what we're fighting this is what we are fighting against, I suppose, really. In any case, there was cynicism about that. You'll remember "Make Our Planet Great Again," which was a slogan that Emmanuel Macron and the Élysée came up with in 2017 to counter Donald Trump's "Make America Great Again." In other words, we need to care about the environment. And just below it in this tweet here, responding to Emmanuel Macron's juxtaposition, Emmanuel Macron in 2020, no action. So I think there's a sense that parole, 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 you could say, or greenwashing, to use another term. That's a term that's been around since the 1980s, basically.
In French, le greenwashing.
Le greenwashing,
okay,
it's been adopted in. Okay. And so essentially, it's like, a lot of image and not a lot of action behind it, and it's all very fashionable, but really what's going on. And of course, that's something that he's been hearing. This is an article going back to 2018, and indeed, Nicolas Hulot, this was Deutsche Welle, their take on it is this all greenwashing, when the very environmentally friendly Nicolas Hulot was brought in as the original ecology minister of Emmanuel Macron, and of course he stepped down over a year later, saying, I'm not being listened to. But in any case, there was a degree of, so that there were people tweeting online saying, look, this is a PR stunt. Fundamentally, when you look at the financing of fossil fuel projects, gas projects, and basically the free trade model generally, this is not what we need in terms of tackling climate change. And so a lot of messages like that going up online.
So a big debate over whether or not it's greenwashing, and also it seems like a little bit of a debate over the president's fashion tastes.
Well, you see, this just to point out that he's been criticised from every angle, greenwashing, but also what he's wearing, and it's sort of a ski outfit that cost €1,000, but it is made in France. I just wanted to point out that this is also the sort of stuff going up online. This sort of, that's a bit unfair. I think he probably has to be dressed warmly in the Alps, and he did wear a made in France outfit. That's nice. But to move to industry for a second, because you were also discussing BP and this rather dramatic announcement. Look, I don't think we have time to go into all of this, but there is one piece in the Financial Times wondering if greenwashing is actually necessary. The point of this piece being that investor behaviour will shift when they are persuaded that the whole industry is breaking the habit too. In other words, yes, so you could have a cynical interpretation about greenwashing, but should we not see it as the first step in altering the normative landscape?
All right, James
I didn't have time to go into the details of that article, but
you always see the glass half full.
I try.
Many thanks, James Green. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.